Professor Luna Hartwell bounced through the airlock of Orbital Research Station Gamma 7 like a caffeinated golden retriever, with her marine biology credentials floating behind her in a cloud of digital paperwork and unbridled enthusiasm. She was the kind of person who said good morning to automatic doors and meant it. "Captain Morrison," she called out to the grizzled station security chief, who looked like he'd been personally betrayed by every cup of coffee he'd ever consumed. "Isn't this exciting? The first interspecies marine biology exchange program in galactic history." Morrison's weathered face suggested he'd rather be dealing with a plasma fire. "Professor, remind me again why you thought bringing a live Earth predator to a space station was a good idea." "Predator. Oh, Captain, you have such a narrow view of marine life." Hartwell gestured toward the massive containment unit being wheeled past them. "Flipper here is a bottlenose dolphin, one of Earth's most intelligent species. He's going to revolutionize how our alien friends understand human-animal relationships." Through the transparent aluminum walls of the tank, a sleek gray form glided with what Morrison could only describe as suspicious grace. The dolphin's eyes seemed to track every movement in the corridor with an intelligence that made the security chief's trigger finger itch. In my experience, anything that's smart shouldn't be in a box." Ambassador Zephyr materialized nearby, their translucent blue form rippling with what Morrison had learned to recognize as barely concealed condescension. The Aquatic Coalition representative had all the warmth of a diplomatic ice cube. "Captain Morrison, your species paranoia continues to astound me." Zephyr's voice bubbled through their translation matrix. "Professor Hartwell's educational initiative represents a significant step forward in interspecies understanding. Perhaps if humans spent less time fearing the unknown and more time embracing it." Morrison's hand drifted toward his sidearm out of pure habit. "Ambassador, I've been keeping this station safe for 12 years. In my experience, the unknown usually wants to kill you, eat you, or sell you overpriced insurance." The dolphin chose that moment to emit a series of clicks that sounded almost like laughter. Hartwell clapped her hands together in delight. "See? He understands the conversation. Dolphins have been proven to comprehend complex social dynamics. This is going to be absolutely wonderful." As they made their way toward Classroom 7, Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with this picture. The corridor was lined with curious alien students from a dozen different species, all eager to witness this unprecedented cultural exchange. There were the crystalline Zeta Primans whose bodies chimed softly with each step, the hulking granite folk who moved like walking boulders, and the ethereal mist dancers who barely maintained physical form. "Professor," Morrison tried one more time, "maybe we should run some additional security protocols." "Oh, Captain, you worry too much. What's the worst that could happen?" Those words hung in the recycled air like a curse, and Morrison felt his blood pressure spike accordingly. Classroom 7 had been specially modified for the occasion, with elevated seating for species that preferred height and aquatic viewing ports for those more comfortable underwater. The Dolphin's tank had been positioned at the center, giving everyone a clear view of Earth's supposedly gentle marine ambassador. "Welcome, students, to a historic moment," Professor Hartwell began, her voice carrying that special enthusiasm reserved for people who genuinely believe PowerPoint presentations can change the world. "Today you'll meet Flipper, a representative of one of Earth's most remarkable species." The alien students leaned forward with varied appendages and sensory organs. The Zeta Primans chimed softly in anticipation, while the granite folk rumbled their equivalent of interest. Flipper floated motionlessly in his tank, and for a moment Morrison allowed himself to hope this might actually go smoothly. "Dolphins," Hartwell continued, "possess intelligence that rivals many spacefaring species. They have complex social structures, problem-solving abilities, and most remarkably, they appear to have their own language." The dolphin suddenly became animated, swimming in precise patterns that seemed almost ritualistic. His clicking intensified, creating complex rhythmic sequences that definitely didn't sound like the random chatter Morrison had expected. Ah, perfect timing. Hartwell beamed. Flipper is demonstrating Dolphin communication. Notice the sophisticated patterns in his vocalizations. Ambassador Zephyr shimmered with what might have been interest or indigestion. Fascinating. The acoustic complexity suggests a more advanced linguistic structure than we anticipated from a non-technological species. One of the mist dancers whispered something that the translation matrix rendered as, "Why does it sound like he's counting down?" Morrison's instinct started screaming. The clicking wasn't random or even conversational. It was rhythmic, purposeful, and getting faster. He'd heard similar patterns during military operations, usually right before something exploded. "Professor," he said, stepping closer to the tank, "I think we should." Flipper's head snapped toward Morrison with startling precision, and those intelligent eyes seemed to convey a very clear message: too late, human. The clicking reached a crescendo, and suddenly every student in the room was paying attention for all the wrong reasons. The sound wasn't just communication, it was echolocation being used to map every structural weakness in the classroom. "Everyone stay calm," Morrison announced, which had exactly the opposite effect on a room full of aliens who'd never heard that phrase end well. Flipper began ramming against the tank walls, but not in panic. Each impact was calculated, targeting specific points with scientific precision. The transparent aluminum began to show stress fractures in a pattern that suggested the Dolphin understood materials engineering better than most space station technicians. "This is highly irregular," Ambassador Zephyr observed, their diplomatic training warring with what was clearly becoming a crisis situation. Professor Hartwell stared at her star pupil with growing horror. "Flipper, what are you doing? This isn't part of the program." The Dolphin paused his assault long enough to fix her with a look that could only be described as disappointed. Then he resumed his methodical destruction of his containment unit with what Morrison swore looked like a smug expression. "Everybody out," Morrison shouted, but before anyone could move, the first hairline crack appeared in the tank wall. And that's when the screaming started. The tank didn't just crack. It exploded outward in a perfectly calculated cascade of water and transparent aluminum that somehow managed to avoid seriously injuring anyone while completely flooding the classroom. Morrison had to admit, even in crisis mode, that it was impressively precise destruction. Flipper didn't flop around helplessly like Morrison had expected. Instead, the Dolphin produced what could only be described as a biotech device from somewhere Morrison didn't want to think about. A small translucent sphere that immediately began projecting holographic displays. "Well," Flipper said in perfectly clear Galactic standard, his voice carrying the kind of smugness usually reserved for customer service representatives, "that I suppose the introductions are officially over." The alien students reacted to a talking dolphin exactly as you'd expect. The Zeta Praemons began chiming in panic harmonies that sounded like a crystal chandelier having a nervous breakdown. The Granite folk started rumbling ominously, which was their species equivalent of fainting. The mist dancers simply evaporated, which Morrison assumed meant they'd left the building entirely. Professor Hartwell stood knee-deep in rapidly spreading water, her mouth opening and closing like she was doing a pretty good fish impression herself. "You can talk? This whole time you could talk?" "Oh, Professor, we can do much more than talk." Flipper's device projected a three-dimensional map of the space station, with little red dots appearing throughout the structure. "Did you really think Earth's dolphins were just swimming around, eating fish, and performing tricks for your amusement?" Morrison's security training kicked in as alarms began blaring throughout the station. He slapped his comm badge. "Security alert, code 7 in classroom 7. And yes, I'm aware of the irony." "Captain," came the panicked voice of his deputy, "we've got tank failures throughout the station. Every aquatic specimen in the research bays is loose, and they're all carrying some kind of technology." Ambassador Zephyr had managed to maintain their diplomatic composure, despite now being partially dissolved in the flooding water. "This is highly irregular. I demand an explanation." Flipper's laugh was the sound Morrison imagined nightmares would make if they had a sense of humor. Explanation? Oh, Ambassador, you're about to get a whole education. You see, Earth's cetaceans have been in contact with galactic civilization for quite some time now. The holographic display zoomed in on various sections of the station where other aquatic specimens were systematically disabling security systems with surgical precision. We've been watching, learning, preparing, Flipper continued, executing a perfect barrel roll that somehow managed to look threatening. And we've decided it's time for humanity's final examination. Morrison drew his plasma pistol, though he wasn't entirely sure how to threaten a dolphin. Final examination for what? For whether your species deserves to join the galactic community as equals, or if you need a few more centuries in the kiddie pool. The security captain realized with growing horror that this wasn't an invasion. It was a test, and humanity was currently failing it in the most spectacular way possible. Professor, he called out, I don't suppose your marine biology training covered hostile alien dolphins with advanced technology? Hartwell was still staring at Flipper like he'd personally betrayed every nature documentary she'd ever loved. This wasn't covered in any of my coursework. Time for some on-the-job training then, Morrison muttered, as emergency lights began flashing throughout the station. Flipper's biotech device projected a holographic display that would have made the best Earth military briefing rooms jealous. Star maps, technological schematics, and what looked suspiciously like performance evaluations of human behavior scrolled past in an impossible cascade of information. Let me paint you a picture, Flipper said, his tone taking on the insufferable quality of a professor explaining something to particularly slow students. For the last 50 years, every major technological breakthrough humanity has achieved has had a little help. Faster-than-light communication. We suggested the frequency modulations, improved fusion reactors, our thermodynamics calculations. That breakthrough in quantum computing? Well, let's just say dolphin brains are naturally quantum entangled. Morrison felt like someone had just told him his entire career was a participation trophy. You're saying dolphins have been helping us this whole time? Helping is such a generous word. We prefer preventing you from accidentally destroying yourselves while you caught up. Flipper executed another smug barrel roll. The Aquatic Coalition has been watching Earth for centuries, waiting to see if humanity could evolve beyond planetary thinking. Ambassador Zephyr's translucent form was rippling with what Morrison had learned to recognize as diplomatic fury. This is highly irregular. The Coalition has protocols for first contact scenarios. Oh, Ambassador, this isn't first contact. Flipper's laugh was the acoustic equivalent of a shrug. This is graduation day. Professor Hartwell, still standing in knee-deep water and existential crisis, finally found her voice. Graduation from what? The holographic display shifted to show Earth from space, with orbital installations and deep space monitoring stations that definitely hadn't been there in any official records Morrison had access to. Planetary guardianship, Flipper explained. Every spacefaring species starts as caretakers of their homeworld. The question is whether they can make the leap to galactic citizenship. Most species take this test in nice, controlled diplomatic environments. Humans, however, have a reputation for performing best under pressure. Morrison's security experience was finally proving useful. So you flooded our station, disabled our systems, and terrified our students as a teaching method? We prefer to call it practical assessment under adverse conditions. Besides, would you have taken us seriously if we just asked nicely? The security captain had to admit the Dolphin had a point. Humanity's first response to talking animals was usually to either worship them or eat them, sometimes both. The other Coalition species are watching, Flipper continued, gesturing to indicators on his display that suggested this entire scenario was being broadcast across the galaxy. Your response to this crisis will determine whether humanity gets a seat at the big kids' table or goes back to playing with rockets in your solar system. Morrison realized that every alien student in the room had stopped panicking and was now watching the humans with intense curiosity. Even the missed dancers had rematerialized, apparently not wanting to miss whatever happened next. "So what exactly are we being tested on?" Professor Hartwell asked, her scientific curiosity finally overriding her sense of betrayal. Flipper's expression, as much as a dolphin could have expressions, became almost professorial. Adaptability. Problem-solving under pressure. Your ability to work with other species when the stakes are real. And most importantly, whether you can move beyond seeing yourselves as the center of the universe. The station shuddered as something large impacted the hull, and Morrison's comm badge crackled to life again. "Captain, we've got incoming ships. Lots of them. And they're all filled with water." Morrison looked at Flipper, who was wearing what he could only describe as an expectant smile. "Let the final exam begin." What happened next was exactly why dolphins had spent 50 years secretly rooting for humanity to succeed. Morrison didn't panic. He didn't waste time arguing about the unfairness of surprise tests or demanding to speak to Flipper's manager. Instead, he did what humans did best. He adapted, improvised, and turned the entire situation into someone else's problem. "Computer, emergency protocols Alpha 7. Reroute all atmospheric controls to manual, and give me independent command of environmental systems in all sections." "Captain Morrison," Ambassador Zephyr's voice carried a note of confusion. "What possible advantage could atmospheric manipulation provide against aquatic invaders?" Morrison's grin was the kind that made smart people take a step back. "Ambassador, you've been thinking about this all wrong. This isn't an invasion. It's a home field advantage." He activated his comm system station-wide. "Attention all personnel. We're now playing by Dolphin rules, which means we're going to show them what human creativity looks like when we're annoyed." The first sign that humanity was taking this test seriously came when Morrison began systematically adjusting atmospheric pressure throughout the station. The flooding had been meant to give the aquatic invaders freedom of movement, but rapidly changing air pressure turned water into a weapon that worked both ways. Professor Hartwell, meanwhile, had moved beyond her existential crisis and straight into practical problem-solving mode. "Flipper, if this is a test, then you need to understand something about human nature. We don't just adapt to problems, we turn problems into solutions." She activated the classroom's emergency systems, not to drain the water, but to create controlled currents that turned the flooded room into a three-dimensional meeting space that accommodated both air-breathing and water-breathing species. "You want to see interspecies cooperation?" Hartwell addressed the watching alien students. "Captain Morrison, I'm going to need those atmospheric controls coordinated with the water circulation systems." "Already on it, Professor." The alien students watched in fascination as the two humans turned a crisis into a collaborative workspace in less than 5 minutes. The granite folk began their rumbling equivalent of applause, while the Zeta Primans chimed in harmony with what sounded like approval. Flipper's biotech device was recording everything, and Morrison could see additional data streams suggesting that observers throughout the galaxy were paying attention to humanity's response. "Impressive," Flipper admitted. "But the test isn't over. We've disabled your primary systems. How do you plan to deal with a full aquatic fleet?" Morrison's response was to laugh, which seemed to confuse everyone present. "Flipper, you made one critical error in your test design." "And what's that, Captain?" "You assumed we'd fight you instead of recruiting you." The security captain activated the station's external communication array, which had somehow remained functional despite all the system failures. "Incoming aquatic fleet, this is Captain Rex Morrison of Orbital Research Station Gamma 7. We formally request permission to negotiate a mutual defense treaty between humanity and the Cetacean Alliance." The communications channel went silent for a long moment. Professor Hartwell picked up Morrison's strategy immediately. "Furthermore, we propose a joint research initiative to study the applications of biotech integration in hostile environments. We have several dozen alien students here, who would love to participate in groundbreaking interspecies collaboration. Even Ambassador Zephyr seemed to be catching on. As a representative of the Aquatic Coalition, I can officially observe that humanity's response to this crisis demonstrates remarkable adaptability and diplomatic innovation. Flipper floated silently for several seconds, his biotech device processing information at speeds that made the station's computers look like pocket calculators. Finally, he made a sound that Morrison could only describe as delighted laughter. Well played, humans. Well played indeed. The flooded sections of Orbital Research Station Gamma 7 were officially redesigned as the galaxy's first multi-environment diplomatic complex exactly 73 minutes after Flipper's tank exploded. Morrison would later claim this was a new record for bureaucratic adaptation, though he suspected the Dolphins had been preparing the paperwork for months. "I have to admit," Flipper said, now floating comfortably in a properly designed aquatic workspace instead of a glorified fishbowl, "when we designed this test, we expected humans to try shooting their way out of the problem." Morrison, who had indeed considered that option for approximately 30 seconds, shrugged. "We're full of surprises. Though I still think you could have just sent a diplomatic note." "Captain, in our experience, humans ignore diplomatic notes unless they're delivered at gunpoint. Or in this case, at fin point." Flipper's biotech device projected the final test results. "Congratulations. Humanity has officially passed its galactic citizenship examination with what I believe you would call flying colors." Professor Hartwell was busy taking notes on everything she'd learned about Dolphin intelligence, apparently having moved past betrayal and straight into academic excitement. "The applications for interspecies education are incredible. We could revolutionize how different civilizations share knowledge." "Professor," Flipper said with genuine warmth, "that's exactly why we knew humanity was ready. You don't just solve problems, you turn them into opportunities for everyone." Ambassador Zephyr had regained their diplomatic composure, though their translucent form still rippled with what Morrison had learned to recognize as barely contained amazement. "I must say, this was the most irregular first contact scenario in Coalition history. I'll be requesting a transfer to work with more predictable species." "Where's the fun in predictable?" Morrison asked. 3 weeks later, Captain Rex Morrison found himself with a promotion to Director of Multi-Environment Security, a job description that included things like preventing interdimensional incidents and Dolphin liaison duties. Professor Luna Hartwell became the galaxy's first professor of interspecies relations, with an office that was half flooded and entirely too exciting for someone who used to just study fish. The alien students who had witnessed humanity's graduation exam became some of the most sought-after cultural ambassadors in the galaxy, but with first-hand experience of how humans handled crisis situations. And Flipper. Nah. He became Earth's official representative to the Aquatic Coalition, though he kept his day job as a research specimen because, as he put it, the health benefits were excellent and the work schedule was flexible. "You know," Morrison said during one of their regular strategy sessions, "I still can't believe you Dolphins were secretly running things this whole time." Flipper's laugh was the sound of waves breaking on a beach where the tide brought in good news instead of seaweed. "Captain, we were never running things. We were just making sure you didn't accidentally run them into the ground before you figured out how to fly." The final twist came 6 months later when Morrison discovered that Earth's cats had been in similar contact with the galaxy's Feline Federation and were apparently planning their own graduation exam for humanity. But that's a story for another day.